as I mentioned, you set up your production company. Initially, it'll develop your projects. You might run smaller projects through it. But when you actually get to doing a larger project, a TV series, a larger feature film, you're quite often setting up that special purpose vehicle, which is that single-use company, basically. If that company is going to be borrowing money against a producer's offset, which is a tax rebate, which I'll mention later, very often the lender will actually require you to set up two companies. They might actually ask you to set up a holding company and a special purpose vehicle, and the holding company will basically be holding the intellectual property, and that separates that intellectual property from the intellectual property in the rest of the production company. So some lenders will actually go, we would like you to set up two companies when you're starting this project, not one. They want you to set up a separate holding company and a separate special purpose vehicle. The shareholding of an SPV, so who actually owns the SPV? What most people do, and I would say 95% of producers, when they set up the SPV, it's not a subsidiary of the production company. So the production company does not own the shares of the SPV. Generally, whoever owns the production company and is directors of the production company are the directors and owners of the SPV. So that's called directors and shareholders in common. So basically, let's say you're running your own production company, you're the sole director, you're the sole owner, and you go to set up an SPV for a project. You become the director and you own those shares personally, same way you own the shares in a production company. You don't have the production company own the shares. And there's several reasons for that. Some of them are tax related, and some of them are concerned about grouping entities and things like that. But when you actually do go to set up your SPV, like I say, 95% of the time, you're just setting it up with the same directors and shareholders of your production company, but they're not owned by the production company. So that it is a separate legal entity there and that sort of thing. So that's just something to watch out for. Other types, legal structures of production, I've just come across, you do get service companies which service overseas productions, and they basically incur all the expenses on behalf of the overseas production and then obviously charge the overseas production. So that's just a slightly different type of company being used slightly differently for film production. And then I'm just going to touch on co-productions. So the co-productions is actually almost a whole topic to itself, in that there are official co-production treaties with, I don't know, 16 or 30 companies, where if you become an official co-production, let's say with us and Israel, then you can access the tax benefits of both countries as an official co-production. But there's also a lot of red tape around becoming an official co-production. Like they have a point system for creativity, and you've got to have 60 points of creativity here and 40 points there. And generally, in my experience, like co-productions are quite difficult to set up. The legal expenses can run into the tens or even the hundreds of thousands. And the conventional wisdom is, unless you've got a project that's, up, 10, $15 million, co-production, like the costs and the delays outweigh the benefits for co-productions, because you've got to apply in both countries and be recognized in both companies, and it can really slow things down. But there are certain projects, like if you're shooting somewhere and doing the post somewhere else, or you've got a story which shoots in both countries, then co-productions are definitely worth looking at. Like I said, it's a whole topic to itself. But when people talk about co-productions, you've almost got to ask if it's an official or unofficial co-production, because there are a lot of co-productions that happen with Canada or the UK or France or things like that. So some co-productions are what you call an official co-production. You've gone on the Screen Australia, they've ticked it off as an official co-production. You can access the tax benefits in both countries. And that's great for certain projects, and that works for certain projects. Other people will say, oh, I'm doing a co-production with another company. And it's actually not a co-production, because you're not going to Screen Australia and they're not signing off, and you're not shooting overseas. You're really just two companies working together. people will call that a co-production, but it's not an official co-production. It's an unofficial co-production. It's worth noting there's no co-production treaty with the US. So a lot of projects, people will say, oh, I've got a project with, working on somebody with the US, it's a co-production with the US. They will always be unofficial co-productions. And, they're governed by a separate agreement, and whether you're, however you're putting it together, whether somebody's putting the IP and somebody's putting the experience, you have a separate negotiation around that for an unofficial co-pro. But it's a term that does get misused or is a little bit used a bit vaguely sometimes, because there's official co-pros and unofficial co-pros. So I just thought I'd touch on that.